friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's new mini stamp set, I Like You a Lotl, as well as You Are Sublime and Mermaid for You. So I've stamped out the images I'll be using on some Nina Solar White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So the first axolotl I'm going to color to be pink, and I'm using R00, R11, and R12. And I'm laying in my shadows first with that R12 along the side of the head and on the gills and the side of the body. I'm going to put a shadow up under the head where the neck would be, and also on the feet and tail. And then I'm going to begin to blend that out with the R11. And the R00 is going to be my highlight shade. So my brother actually has several axolotls. They started with 2. So the boy is actually the pink one. His name is Lightning. And the girl is dark gray, and her name is Thunder. So these were purchased as gifts for my nephew Murdoch when he was 4 years old. So he could learn to take care of them, and they've had them ever since. And he's 9 years old now, so they've had them for 5 years. So I did come in with the R22 and darken up the gills and also the center of the tail, because on axolotls that area is darker. So now I'm going to move on to coloring Thunder, and I'm going to use W1, W3, and W5. So I'm laying in my shadows in the same way with the W5 as my shadow, and then the W3 as my midtone, and the W1 for my highlight. So just in case you weren't aware of what axolotls are, they are a Mexican salamander, also called the Mexican walking fish, but they are not fish, they are amphibians, and they are actually a critically endangered species. So as I mentioned, my brother started out with these two, Thunder and Lightning, and he didn't know that one was a male and a female when he got them. They have since learned a lot about axolotls, but anyway, they had lots and lots and lots of babies. The female Thunder laid almost 500 eggs, and so my brother, being an animal lover just like me, he went and learned about the care of axolotls, and he made sure that he took good care of those eggs. They hatched, and he raised these tiny babies. They were so small you could barely even see them. They were nearly invisible. But he raised them, and 50 of them made it to adulthood. So they have a few more now. They don't have all 50. They gave away a lot of them to friends, and I think even back to the pet store where they had bought the original pair. So anyway, I used the W7 to darken up Thunder's gills and tail, and then I'm adding some rosy cheeks with the R20. So my brother actually has several videos on his YouTube channel that deal with raising axolotls. He's also got videos on his scuba diving and all of that. But I'm going to link to one in the description bar that stars my nephew Murdoch when he was 4 years old. It's just cute, and it also will help you learn more about these amazing creatures in case you're interested. So I'm moving on to my seagrasses, and for those I used YG21, YG23, and YG25. And I'm just going to color the one on screen since I did the other two exactly the same. And now moving on to that large stone, and I wanted it to be a different color than Thunder. I didn't want it to be the same, so since I did her in the warm grays, I decided to use the cool grays for the rock. So I used C0, C1, C3, and C5. So I'm adding some shadows with that C5, just creating some different variations where that stone is kind of like curved and carved, and you know, just giving it a little bit more texture. And then I'm blending that out with the C3, and I'm not being too neat about it either because this is stone, so it doesn't need to have like a super smooth glassy finish. Even smooth stones, they have some variation in them, so went ahead and left a little bit of that streakiness in there. So now I'm moving on to these little coral, and I'm using VO5, VO6, and VO9. Starting with the VO9, which is a nice dark purple shade. So I'm adding some shading with that first, and then I'm going to blend that out with the VO6. And I'm making sure to really scrub over the edge of that VO9 because it is such a dark shade and there is quite a bit of difference between these two. So I just want to make sure that I have a nice transition. And then I will fill in the rest of the space with the VO5. And these two are much more close, so I don't have to work quite as hard to create a nice blend. Next, I'm moving on to V13, V14, and V17, and I'm going to do this other plant that's over here. I wanted to choose a lot of bright, fun colors because normally like aquarium decorations are like neon shades, so I just thought it would be a fun way to add some bright pops of color with these different corals and seashells. For the starfish, I'm using YR04, YR07, and YR09. So I just used a little of that YR09 first, and then I'm blending that out with the YR07, and then I'll use the YR04 in the center for the highlight. And then for the little conch shell, I'm going to start with E00 just to lay in a little bit of color, and then I'm going to add some detail to that. I used R11 to color in the inside of the shell, and then I'm going to pull in E21, E23, and E25 to add some spots on the outside. So I used the E25 first, and then I'm going to blend out the edge of that with the E23. And then finally take that E21 and just kind of soften it into the rest of the shell. For the clamshell, I'm going to use Y11, Y13, and Y15 with my darkest at the base and then blending lighter and lighter toward the top. And then I'll trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I've taken a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock, and I'm going to start blending on some Distress Oxide inks. The first color that I'm using is Peacock Feathers, and I'm adding that in a circle in the center of the panel. Then I'm going to bring in Mermaid Lagoon, and I'm going to come in all around that to kind of create a little bit of a vignette, so it'll be lighter in the center and then darker on the edges, and that's just going to pull your focus toward the center of the card and where all the images will be. So I'm going to bring in that Mermaid Lagoon on all the sides, just skipping the bottom because that's going to get covered up anyway, and putting on a decent amount of color there so that I can, build it up so that it's nice and bright. And then I'll go back to my peacock feathers and blend over that center to smooth the transition area. And then I'm going to bring in some chipped sapphire. And this one I'm going to use less of. I'm going to be a bit more sparing and really just concentrate on those outside edges to just really create that dark halo on the outside of the scene. And once I have enough color laid on there, I will go back to my Mermaid Lagoon and blend the transition area. And then when I'm happy with that, I'll go back to the peacock feathers and blend over that one more time as well, just to smooth everything out. With Distress Inks, it's all about building up those layers, and that's how you get a nice smooth blend. So then I'm going to take some liquid stardust from Lawn Fawn. I'm going to shake that up to get the pigment all mixed into the liquid. I'll pour a little bit onto an acrylic block, and then I'm going to flick that onto my panel with a paintbrush so I can get some nice splatters. And I'm starting with just a small amount at a time because I don't want any drops that are too big. I kind of want to keep them to a smaller size. I really love that pearlized effect that it gives that when you tip it into the light. And now I need to create a bottom portion so that I can have the sand. So I'm using some antique linen and I'm blending that onto another piece of Bristol that I die cut with the simple stitched hillside borders. So I have that nice stitching detail there. So I blended in the antique linen from the top, and now I'm going to take the gathered twigs and blend that in from the bottom. So I'm going to just bring each one about halfway, and then once I have those both laid in, I'll go back to the antique linen and blend over the transition. And then I'm also going to splatter some of both colors on there to create more of a sandy texture. So I just smooshed some of my ink down on my work surface, and I'm going to water that down a bit and then pick it up with my paintbrush and splatter that all over. So I'll have some lighter and darker droplets. So it'll just create a lot of variation and just, you know, that kind of coarse texture that sand has. I didn't really want those bigger droplets in the center, so I just grabbed a dry baby wipe and blotted those up. And then I'm also going to splatter a bit of that liquid stardust so that can resemble the little sparkly glassy bits in the sand. So once those panels have dried, I'm going to pop them in my MISTI. I'm going to work on the background first, and I'm using my chipped sapphire Distress Oxide ink again, and I'm going to stamp out a bunch of the little bubbles so that they will be in the background, and I chose the ones that were all shaped like hearts. So the trio and one of the single hearts is from You Are Sublime, and then the other single heart is from I Like You a Lotl. So I'm going to stamp those down a few times so that I can get a whole bunch of those little bubbles. And then I'm going to add the sand in my MISTI, and I'm going to stamp my sentiment on that. And I started with the gathered twigs again because I wanted it to match, but it ended up not showing up very well. I knew that it was going to dry back a bit, and I didn't think the sentiment was going to be prominent enough. So I grabbed ground espresso instead, and since that was in my MISTI, I can just stamp right over that, and it will be a lot bolder. So I was much happier with that result, and I did stamp it down twice to make sure I had a good impression, and then I made sure to set this aside again to dry because it did have 3 layers of ink on there. So for the inside of my card, I'm going to be using a dark colored card base, so I'm going to do an insert, and I trim that down with the outside in stitch rectangle stackables, and I'm stamping in Deep Sea ink. And I'm stamping out the axolotl again with that trio of hearts and the sentiment that says I am deeply in love with you from You Are Sublime. So now I'm ready to start my assembly. I'm going to take my focal panel and add that to a Lawn Fawn Blue Jay card base. And I scored and folded that to a standard A2 size card with a top fold. And then I'm going to add my sand down at the bottom. I'm also going to grab that insert and glue that down to the inside of the card. And by the way, I did die cut the focal panel with this same die, so they are the same size, the insert and the focal panel. That's the largest die in the outside in stitch rectangle stackables. So now I can add my images, and I'm going to start with that large stone since that's my largest image, and I'm going to adhere that at the bottom right. And then I'm going to grab some seagrasses, and I want those to be kind of poking out from behind the rock, and I need to add those before I add the axolotls so I know how high to put them on the card. So the one that I just adhered with the 2 leaves at the top, that one is from I Like You a Lotl, and then this one with the 1 leaf at the top, that one's from You Are Sublime. So I added those 2 behind the rock, and now I'm just kind of trying to figure out what I want to go where. So I'm going to add this purple coral right down in front of that rock, and then I've got a few other items that I'm going to create another cluster with the smaller rock. So these little pink leaves or I'm not sure what they are, if it's coral or a plant. And then I've got another one of the little seaweeds, and then the little stone I'll put kind of in front of those. I dropped it by accident, but thank goodness I was using liquid glue and I could just wipe that up real quick and then wipe my finger off with a baby wipe. So now that I've got my plants laid in, I can add my axolotls and make sure that I have them spaced how I want them above those items. So I put lightning over on the right hand side and thunder on the left, and kind of just gave them a little bit of a twist to make them look a little bit more fun and quirky, give them some more personality, and create a bit more movement on the scene. And then I'm going to add my 3 little seashells. So I put the conch shell over on the right, and then the clam shell, I wanted to accent that sentiment, and then the starfish I'm going to put over on the left. To finish off the card, I'm going to add some stardust stickles to add a little bit of sparkle. So I added it to all of my seashells. And then I'm going to just put a little line of it on the edge of the purple coral, and I'll do the same on the pink coral. And then I decided to just dot it in on each leaf of the seaweed. And then I felt like the axolotls also needed just a touch of it as well to bring that sparkle upward on the card and not just have it all clustered at the bottom. So I added it to the gills and the center of the tail for them. So I will lift that up to the camera so you can see how it catches the light with that stardust stickles and also the liquid stardust on the background. And then I'll give you another peek at the inside. This card is actually on the Lawn Fawn blog today, so I'll have a link to that down below, as well as a link to the video that I mentioned and to all of the products that I used today in case you're interested in checking them out. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss a thing. I have a few changes coming to my channel in the new year, but I'll talk more about that in another video. If you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also be interested in. You can click on either one to check them out. I hope you all have an amazing day. Bye-bye.